Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Arcaven Comics. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Tonight I'm going to talk about a subject that is, of course, near and dear to many hearts, which is the World Cup, Il Mondiale. And like a lot of you, I've been watching it, as I'm sure you can imagine. And there have been some interesting games, some good upsets, some disappointments, everything that you expect from a good major football tournament. As you can see, the team I support did not make it, unfortunately. So I did not have the chance to break out the old school Italian jerseys, which is of course too bad. This is one from the heyday of the Maldini, Inzaghi, Del Piero era. So back when they actually won one, or actually when they won a Euro. They didn't win the World Cup, but they won a Euro championship. But what I want to talk about is not the World Cup for its own sake, but rather what it indicates about nationalism and the future of nationalism in a world where the globalists, which includes organizations like FIFA that is putting on the World Cup, have in store. And what I think is the most interesting aspect of what we're seeing at the World Cup is the fact that even when nationalism is being intentionally suppressed as significantly as possible, we still see that it surfaces. We still see that the globalist authorities are not able to eliminate the desire of people to be among their own, to represent their own, and to find meaning in their nationalist identity. A commenter here says, I like to see teams that look like the country they're from. That's exactly right. If we get to the point where the World Cup resembles an NFL football team or an NBA basketball team, there's not going to be any point in it anymore. It's going to become what Jerry Seinfeld called a competition of laundry. And when you look at the England team, they had a big win today. Absolutely trounced Panama. But does it look like an English team? Not really. The French certainly don't. The Swiss are more Armenian and African than they are Swiss. If you look at a team like Senegal, on the other hand, they're all Senegalese. The Japanese are all Japanese. It's really appalling when you see the extent to which the various Western countries have been invaded for generations now. Many of these players who are playing for countries that are not their own nation. And keep in mind, many of them don't even identify with the nation that they are supposedly representing. That's not just true of the Albanians, with like Shaqiri and Shaka and others, but it's also true, for example, of some of the Germans. You've got Boateng, plays very well, by the way, plays for Germany, but his brother plays for one of the African teams. Shaqiri's brother actually plays, I think he's the captain of the Albanian national team. How is that possible? And the interesting thing, if you look at the secondos on the German team, Özil, and I think there's two others, they are aggressively anti-German. They literally will not sing the German anthem. They consider themselves Turks. I believe it was Özil and one of the other players actually met with the Turkish prime minister or president. I'm not actually sure what his title is, but they actually met with Erdogan before the big match. And so when you see this happening, you can see that this is the graphic indication of the invasion that has taken place over the past 50 or 60 years. Someone mentioned the Swiss players, and here's what they're talking about. That's Xhaka. He's a decent player, and he scored the first goal, a great goal the other night. And they made this symbol. It's what it's meant to indicate is the two eagles that are on the Kosovo flag. And it was interesting because Shaqiri, who's the star of the Swiss team, he made exactly the same symbol. Why? Why are these Swiss players making this gesture? Why are they focused on using this international stage to flash the symbol of a different country? It's because that is their nation. Now, I actually know a fair number of Albanians. In fact, there were 5 or 6 Albanians on my team several years ago. Recently, I think it was 3 years ago, they managed to get enough of them together to form their own team. And they're very good, extremely good. Definitely a challenge to play. They tend to be pretty hot-headed. Fortunately, because so many of them are my team's former teammates, we never have any trouble with them. But occasionally, other teams in the league do. And I mean, these guys live to play soccer. That's literally all they do. And they are very, very hardcore Albanian nationalists. They do not consider themselves to be Italian. The ones in Switzerland do not consider themselves to be Swiss. They are, and they will tell you very aggressively that they are Albanian. Now, I don't have a problem with this. I get along with them extremely well. I have a standing invitation to play with them if I wanted to switch teams. One of the players there is probably my favorite strike partner that I've ever played with. Great player, phenomenal teamwork, great guy. And but this, so I'm pointing this out in order to demonstrate that this behavior is normal. And in fact, these particular guys, they were engaging in these gestures because, of course, they were playing Serbia. Neither of these guys have done this when they're playing any of these other teams. Now, the other thing that people don't realize, one of the Serbian players said, "Hey, if he said to Shaqiri, who has a Swiss flag on one of his shoes and he has the Kosovo flag on the other one, he said, hey, if you are so supportive of Kosovo, why don't you go play for them? But the fact is that both Shaka and Shaqiri tried. They filed an application to get special permission to play for their nation. And they were denied it by FIFA because FIFA, unlike the United States and unlike a number of other countries that permit dual citizenship, FIFA does not permit you to play for more than one team's country ever in your career. And so that's why you see some of these American players who are American citizens. There was a defender, I believe, in the last World Cup. He'd never lived in the States. He was born in Germany, raised in Germany, played football in Germany. He wasn't good enough to make the German national team. And so the U.S. team recruited him, and he was allowed to play for them. And so, and obviously there's a lot of bad blood between the Albanians, the Kosovars, and the Serbians. I mean, they fought a war over Kosovar independence and so forth. But, so there's obviously this bad blood and so forth. But don't you think it's interesting that FIFA is more concerned about ruining the competitive balance of the game than countries are about protecting and preserving their own citizenry? I find that both fascinating and appalling. But this is also encouraging in a way, because because what this shows is that even when you've got second generation immigrants, technically Shaqiri is a first generation immigrant because he was actually born in Kosovo and they moved to Switzerland when he was quite young as refugees. But the fact is that they maintain their allegiance to their nation, they maintain their national identity, and they will continue to do so as long as they continue to express that and defend it with each other. And so, as irritating as some people might find this, and that's understandable, I find it a very encouraging sign of the resurgence of nationalism. Globalism is going to fail. Nationalism is going to rise. And the entire globalist plan to eradicate the nations is going to fail. And if you think about it, of course it's going to fail. Has the Jewish nation disappeared simply because it was persecuted? Did the Jewish nation disappear simply because it didn't actually have a homeland to call its own? Of course not. Jews remain Jews, whether they live in Israel, whether they live in the United States, in the same way that these two Kosovars remain proud, self-identified Kosovars, even when they are playing for the Swiss national team. And I think that you are going to consider seeing that as we see the continued rise of nationalism, as we see the continued rise of national identity. I think it was just today, Matteo Salvini announced that no ships are going to be permitted to bring any more migrants over from Libya. That whole nightmare that began in 2015, thanks to Angela Merkel, is now over. Because the Italian people have elected a nationalist government, and it's actually a trans-ideological government. It's an alliance of the left and right. What do they have in common? They're Italian. They all know they're Italian. And they want Italy to remain Italian. They don't want the Italian national team to turn into a mercenary team like Switzerland, like the United States, like France, like some of these other countries that are, grabbing players from whatever nation they can in order to improve their country's football team. So that's my message about the significance of the World Cup to the current rise of nationalism. Now, I also have a happy announcement to make. This is a little bit of a sneak peek for those of you who are, or I guess an early alert for all of you who took the time to tune in. This is a screen from Amazon, and you may recognize that it is our new comic, Alt Hero number 2, Rebels Cell. And we are launching it tomorrow, officially, but it is already up there and live on Amazon. It will be going out to the backers tomorrow. So if you're a backer, just check your email. Links to your free download are going to be there. If you've got Kindle Unlimited, this is available on Kindle Select, so you can go ahead and download it for free right now. Otherwise, I would highly recommend picking it up. It's really good. If you like the story from the first one, I guarantee you'll like the story from this one, and I think you'll agree that we continue to improve our comics. That's the goal. That's what we're working on. Let me show you a bigger version of the cover. That's the cover, and as you can see, we didn't hesitate. This was actually something that was this was something that I'd been thinking about, because ever since I was a kid, the Justice League was always defending the United Nations, and the villains, the supervillains, were always planning to blow up the United Nations building. But if you paid any attention to the behavior of the United Nations in pretty much any country, it is bad beyond belief. I was talking to a friend of mine who works with international NGOs and so forth, and he said that the first thing that the UN does whenever it sets up any sort of aid mission anywhere, the first thing they do is set up the local whorehouse. And that's when they're behaving well. Sometime look up what the Belgian UN peacekeepers were doing in the Congo. It defies belief. And so we are literally turning the comics industry on its head. And what you're going to see with this is radically different, radically new, and we think that it is going to become one of the more popular comics that are out there. Batman is on decline. All the Superman's in decline. X-Men is too. The overall comic sales are down more than 10%. We're down about 10% last year. They're already down more this year in terms of unit sales. There's a huge vacuum there because nobody wants to read what they're doing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to tell better stories. We're going to create better characters, and we're going to make it more relevant to the world that we actually live in. And speaking of that, what a lot of people may not realize is that the world of alt-real that we're describing is not quite as fictitious as you might think. I don't know if you recall the character of Runosation, but as you can see, she's real. And so it's going to be very interesting because we are going to be creating characters that young men like to look at, that young women like to dress up like. We are going to be creating an entire comic universe to rival the Marvel comic universe. We are going to be making movies eventually. I actually spent over an hour talking to a movie producer today. And so we have multiple options that are presenting themselves already. Is she black? No, Runosation is Japanese. So anyhow, but yeah, so what we're doing with Alt Hero is revolutionary. It's not just different in terms of content, but it's very different in terms of how we're distributing things, how we're selling them. We're going to have new announcements coming on a regular basis over the rest of this year. And it's going to relate to the comic stores. It's going to relate to the movies. It's going to relate to our direct online sales, both print and digital. Question here, multiple options as in movie options that are not Alt Hero? Yes, in fact, we were talking about that today specifically because there is one group, the various groups that we've been talking to are both very interested in Alt Hero. And there's a very good reason for this. If you look at Marvel and you look at DC, all that stuff is owned. If you look at IDW, most of that stuff is licensed from Hasbro or somebody else. So there's actually very little that's out there that is available for people to make new movies with. And so when we're creating this whole new universe, and remember, Chuck Dixon is actually here. Let me show you one more thing. This will take just a second, but I was just doing it today, and I think it's worth having a look at here. Chuck Dixon, who is the great comics writer, he's working with us, and he's working within the Alt Hero universe, but he is working in his. Let's see, there we go. Okay, he is working in his own way, in his own style, and he's doing his own thing. So this is the cover here. Here's another little sneak peek here. This is the cover of Chuck Dixon's Avalon #1. The name is going to be called The Street Rules. And it's going to be a different look, a different feel, but it's set within the same world. And so there's interest in what he's doing. There's interest in what I'm writing, and all of it is connected. And I think that's why people are really interested, because they see the quality, they see the talent that's involved, both in terms of artistic and, more importantly, on the writing. And so it's going to be, I think, extremely popular over time. A couple questions. Vox, are you worried that some company will purchase the film rights to Alt Hero simply to keep it in development hell so that it never actually gets released? I'm not remotely worried about that, because we're not going to structure any film deals in any way that prevents us from getting it out there. We already have a non-exclusive deal with the producer with whom we're working. So, I am not going to sell out. Right now Disney's buying up all the content. So, and you can't, if you've got money to invest and you want to get involved in that, then you can't play because Disney owns everything. So, anyhow, another question. I mean, comic books are one thing. When are you going to start pushing for classical art forms that appeal to right-wing sensibilities? Well, I'm probably not. I'm not involved in any sorts of classical arts. And so, I mean, I support those things. I listen to those things. I like classical music and so forth, but that's beyond my capabilities. So, any interest in Arts of Dark and Light movie TV show? Yes, we have discussed that with some people that are working in a space that it would make sense. But that's a huge project. That's a much bigger project, and so I don't think that it's the right place for us to begin. I mean, that's a long-term thing. That's something that we're interested in working up to. But I think that it's going to be a while before we can reasonably give that a shot. It's kind of like with what we did with the what do you call it? It's similar to how the approach we took dealing with the audiobook. We could have done the audiobook a long time ago, but we didn't find the right voice. It took me 3 years to find the right voice. We finally found the right voice, and then we did it. So it's in the works right now. It'll be out. End of this year. Somebody said Psychosonic soundtrack for Alt Hero and Avalon movies. I think it's entirely possible that we might actually have a new Psychosonic song or two if we do an Alt Hero movie. So, wonder if Arts of Dark and Light would do better than Game of Thrones if it was made. Oh, well, I would hope so. But who knows? Certainly I think that the books are better overall. But let's see, question. If you disagree with Spencer's white nationalism, and I do, how do you view America's future? I've been very clear about my perspective on America's future. I believe that the United States is going to break apart in the 2033 timeframe. I think that there is likely to be some form of civil war and ethnic cleansing. I don't know by whom. I don't know how the lines will be drawn. I don't know any of that sort of thing, and I don't have an opinion on any of that sort of thing. It has been, over a decade since I've even set foot there. What I will say is that Trump is the greatest and best hope for a minimum of unpleasantries. And so the more that Trump is able to do his thing, the more likely it is that the outcome is not going to be as bad as it could be. But the reality that you have to keep in mind is that the United States has experienced the largest invasion in human history. And historically, and if you don't like the term invasion, fine, let's drop it. It has experienced the largest movement of peoples in human history. And historically, those human movements, those big movements of peoples, have always ended in large-scale violence. I think it is incredibly naive to imagine that if all of these other big movements of peoples have ended in various forms of war, I cannot imagine the largest one in human history not doing the same. So, I don't mean to be pessimistic here. I'm not trying to get anybody down. This is normal. This has happened many, many times before. We're not any different. Someone says, I think Hispanics can be convinced that they're white given time and immigration restriction. No, they can't. They don't want to be. This is what white people do not understand. Most people don't want to be like you. They just want money. They just want resources. But they want to be themselves. And that's fine. Let's see here. Are there any AAA right-leaning video games being developed for the future that you know of? No. Let's see. What will happen with Canada? I have no clue. I don't know anything about Canada. Do you think Italy will repatriate all of their African and Muslim migrants and restore Italy? Yes, eventually. There's a long, long history of Italians being beaten, occupied, and eventually encouraging their invaders to leave. I don't think that this will be any different. That's true. As somebody pointed out, Salvini has already said, we need a mass cleansing street by street, quarter by quarter. They already have nationalist politicians in place who are more than willing to repatriate all of those that they don't consider to be desirable residents. And it's entirely possible. Maybe they'll decide that they don't want. Maybe they'll decide that they don't want people like me. That's their right. I'm not even remotely concerned about it. But we'll see. So, let's see. Vox, in which state do you live, and what will happen to it if the balkanization is inevitable? I don't live in any United States. I left back in 1999. Do you think the UK will do the same as Italy and repatriate their African Muslims, or is the UK a lost cause? I think they will eventually. They did it before with the Danes. A lot of people don't realize that the Danes were they successfully invaded England and then were wiped out in the big cleansing of the North. I think it was even called the cleansing of the North. To such an extent that there's virtually no genetic influence of the Danish invaders on the English population today. So anyhow, that's all I have tonight. So please check out Alt Hero number 2. I think that you're going to enjoy it. I hope you'll review it and let your friends know about it. And we'll look forward to seeing you the next time. Have a good evening.